So today we have Ruth McGrath with us today from Nicholas and Harris. Hello, Ruth.
Hi.
So I'm just going to chat to everyone about, well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm James from Giant Peach. I think most of the people on this webinar do. We're a creative digital agency that creates strategy that drives growth, content that sparks connection, and user experience that converts. And we've been running High Growth Collective now for about 5 years. But this is the first time we've run it digitally, so I'm extremely excited about exploring this format, seeing how we get on. There is a slight change to the agenda. On reflection, having 3 talks that are 20 to 30 minutes long is a lot of content to consume. So we want to ensure that we are delivering the best possible content to you guys and you're getting the most value out of the content. So what we've decided to do is cut up into 3 separate webinars. We felt that this is the best way for the content to come across and actually keep your attention for within that sort of 30-minute window, which is about right. So today we have Ruth McGrath. Tomorrow it's me doing talking about website conversions, and next Monday on the 27th, we have James and Fran from Gore Brown who are going to be talking about sustainable investment. I'm really excited about this talk this morning because Ruth has so much experience with some fantastic brands like Millie's Cookies, Wagon Wheels, Jammy Dodgers, Meridian, and she's going to share her experience and insight into consumer habits and how you can ensure that your brand is as contemporary as consumer habits. Now, if everyone can just use the panel, the chat panel, and if you want to ask any questions, just pop them in there and make sure you've ticked all the panelists and attendees. So Ruth, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Ruth McGrath. I'm the brand marketing manager at Nicholas and Harris, a craft bakery based here in Wiltshire. We specialise in producing artisan breads, rolls and buns, including hot cross buns. We predominantly produce these products for retailer-owned label, but we also have a brand portfolio. Within this brand portfolio, we have 2 key brands, which are Vogel's and Live Life. I've been brought into the business in July last year to look at how I can drive these brands and create a brand portfolio that we can really be proud of and that are as modern as the consumer habits. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how I've done this and how consumer insights and really getting to know your audience, your consumers, your customers, your shoppers are really essential to pulling together key insights to unlocking great brands. Before I do that, a little bit about me. I've worked in food and drink brand management for 14 years. I've been really lucky to work across both retail and food service. I've worked on British brands, international brands, and I've been the brand guardian for some really key household names, including Wagon Wheels, Millie's Cookies, Jammy Dodgers, and Meridian Foods. I absolutely love working in brand management. For me, it allows me to touch every part of the business, to pull together information from every part of the business, work with cross-functional teams, develop communications campaigns, work on exciting new product development, which I refer to as MPD throughout this presentation quite a lot. And most of all, and the bit that really excites me, is getting under the skin of consumers and how they think and how they behave. Isabel Liddell, who is the founder of an insight agency called Curiosity and Clarity, says that the biggest thing that has potential to mess with your plans in 2020 is your target customers. If they don't like what you are doing, or if your message or marketing doesn't resonate with them, or if your offering isn't quite aligned to what they want, your customers, your consumers, your shoppers, or your lack of them can have a really big impact on your business. Understanding these behaviours and needs and wants of your customers, your consumers, your users, your clients, your shoppers, whatever terminology it is you use, it is essential to identifying the gaps, the opportunities and the challenges within your business. There are lots of great examples of products, brands and advertising campaigns that have been based on sound consumer insight, and I've picked out a few today to really demonstrate the power of investing in this area and what happens sometimes when you don't. For me, the number one example that springs to mind is Dove. They launched their campaign for Real Beauty in 2004. They wanted to create a campaign that fought against the traditional images of beauty within the industry, and it was born out of the emotional insight that women don't think they are attractive enough. Dove vowed to empower women of all ages, races, shapes and sizes, and to give them confidence to be who they are. They've launched products and product ranges to support these women. They've launched communications campaigns that have evolved around age and size and particular body concerns. And they've even launched a project called the Self-Esteem Project, which is aimed at young teenage girls. This came out of the shocking fact that they found that 8 out of 10 teenage girls were so concerned with the way they look and the way that they feel, they opt out of important daily activities. When looking at what this campaign delivered, PR Week have said that the campaign's extended beyond promoting a vision for beauty equality. Sales jumped from $2.5 billion to $4 billion within the first 10 years internationally. Dove bars became the #1 preferred soap brand within the US and Unilever's best-selling product internationally. They continue to fight against the beauty industry and support women across the world today. It's a campaign that is still running because it has been based on solid consumer insight. Another great example, and based on a very similar insight to Dove, is the This Girl Can campaign. The original campaign was about normalising exercise and sport for women. It was designed to empower them and get the nation moving. This came out of the insight that there was a real fear of judgment from women about exercise and sport. The campaign gained traction and more women took up regular exercise and sport. However, 5 years into the campaign, Sport England have had to tweak their messaging and review what they were doing. In a Marketing Week interview last year, they admitted that the This Girl Can campaign hadn't reached all women to the same level. They said that 33.5% of women in lower paid routine or manual jobs were less active than those in senior and managerial roles. They reinvested in listening to their audience and doing some research and gathering insights. And they found that 63% of women still feel negatively about their bodies and about themselves after seeing slim toned bodies on social media. They realised that the fear of judgment is as much prevalent today than it ever has been, and they've had to change their messaging to look at how they can break down the mental and well-being barriers towards sport and exercise. It isn't all about big brands with big research budgets, but sometimes insights come from the day-to-day running of your business. A great example of this is Don't Buy Her Flowers, a company you may not have heard of, but a company that's worth looking into. After the birth of her son, Steph Douglas felt overwhelmed by the influx of bouquets she received. She was learning how to be a mum, keep the small person alive, and all of a sudden she had to worry about flower arranging, whether she had enough vases, and keeping them alive as well as this small, vulnerable person. After the birth of her second child, she decided to act. She again received an influx of bouquets and realised that actually what new mums need is a little bit of TLC. She created her online-based business with thoughtfulness at its core. She created care packages aimed at these new mums, consisting of a magazine, some chocolates and some tea. She started the business in her spare room, handwriting all of the gift tags, something that she still does today. From adding this human emotional touch to the packages, Steph was soon able to gather insights and realise that people weren't just buying these packages for new mums, but for birthdays, get well soon, thank yous, and so on. A great example that she talks about in one of her blogs is the mum package. This was launched after receiving a request from one of her customers whose brother was in hospital, and she highlighted that men need as much TLC as women do. Earlier this year, Steph and her team of 10 moved into a bigger warehouse. They had a phenomenal Christmas with sales jumping 68%. They've just had their biggest ever Mother's Day and are set to hit £1 million turnover this year. Social media and writing her blog has been the key part of the success, and looking and involving her audience and continue to speak to her audience and what they want. It's not all success stories. Sometimes brands and companies fail when they don't invest in insights or when they don't look and identify key consumer changes. The number one company that comes up when you Google brands that have failed is Blockbuster. Reading back on why, innovation always comes up as the number one reason, but a brand cannot innovate if it doesn't listen and understand new and emerging behaviours of its customers and its consumers. They failed to recognise that people wanted the convenience of having movies delivered to their home without worrying about late fees, without charges. They wanted something that could come to them. This was something that Netflix identified. And actually Netflix approached Blockbuster and they wanted to do a partnership, but Blockbuster laughed them out of the building. And look who survived today. Another example is tie rack. This is a fashion example. Tie rack was aimed at men and men looking for ties, cufflinks, belts and accessories. Tie rack failed to research and identify key trends and key insights that were happening with their target market and their shopping behaviour. They failed to notice that ties were becoming less popular, no longer an office staple. Men were having a tendency to only wear them for special occasions. And this meant that men were only buying these ties when they were also buying a brand new shirt. These transient tie rack stores, often found in train stations and shopping centres, suddenly no longer met the needs of their target customers. But you know what? It isn't just small brands, even sometimes big brands with big research budgets make mistakes. And this is something that Coca-Cola found out in 1985. At the time, Pepsi were doing a great job of building their brand and creating a product and marketing campaigns that resonated with their target consumers. In taste tests, Pepsi often came out as the number one product. They were the one that was most preferred. Coca-Cola responded by saying, we need to change our recipe. We need to take Pepsi head on. We need to launch a new product. They did this. They launched new Coke. But what they failed to understand was the power of the brand and what it meant to their consumers and to people. This was a really key insight of just how big a brand and how powerful a brand that Coca-Cola had built. Consumers rebelled. They said that they were going to stop buying the product, and Coca-Cola were at risk of unpicking everything that they had done with their brand. They quickly turned on their heels. They reverted back to their old recipe, and this is something today that is known as Coca-Cola Classic. Something that's a little bit closer to my current role at Nicholas and Harris is Kingsmill. They attributed their decline to the growth of own label. But my first question when I started working in the bread category was why. I wanted to understand why bread was declining, why brands such as Kingsmill were declining, and I wanted to understand what the consumer motivations and behaviour changes were to ensure that I could grow my brands and make sure that they didn't fall into the same trap as Kingsmill. What I identified was sliced bread has become a commodity market. Shoppers don't want to pay more for a plain white loaf when they could get the same product under own label. They want new and exciting. They want to pay for products and brands with added value. They want to pay for something that has something a little bit more about them. So how and where to find these insights, and what do you do if you don't have big budgets or extensive research at your fingertips? The first thing you need to do is have an idea of what it is you're trying to answer. Is there a key performance challenge? Are your communications not working? Is your MPD failing? Are you doing really well and you want to keep on track? Are you looking at expanding into a different market? Is there a new consumer that you want to target? It's really good to start with a hypothesis, where your gaps are and what it is that you want to achieve. One big watch out for me when talking about modern brands and modern habits is it's really easy to fall into the trap of millennials and Gen Z. They are the sexy audience. They're the modern day up and coming consumers, but actually failing to recognize that the older generation, our parents, our grandparents, they have a lot of disposable income. And thanks to social media, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, they are as modern and as exciting and as contemporary as younger audiences. Next, you want to think about how you're going to obtain the information and how you're going to find it. In my current role, I've had to think really carefully about how I spend my budget. I was set with a task of growing the brand portfolio from 14% of total revenue to 25%. But I had a really small budget, and this budget had to also deliver communications campaigns, new products, and packaging. So before I invested in spending any money on research, I looked at what I could gather and what insights I could pull together from some really key pillars and some really key sources of information. I'm going to take you through these now, and hopefully they will spark a little bit of interest or be able to give you some ideas on how you can understand your shoppers, your consumers, and your customers a little bit better. So the first one that I looked at was social media. The lines have blurred and it's no longer about what young people are doing. I've said, older generations are on social media. Even if you go on TikTok, there's TikTok grandma, there's TikTok granddad. There's older people that are being made famous by the social media platform. There's a wealth of information at your fingertips. It's an open book. You've got millennials who are open and honest mums and dads. They're campaigning for flexible working and for mental health. You've got younger consumers who are using platforms like TikTok to really express who they are. As well as looking into different types of consumers, different ages, different markets, you can also use this to have a look at what messages are resonating with different consumers, what messages are resonating with your followers and how they're reacting. And what about checking your competitors as well? Don't forget to look at what your competition, what similar products are doing, and how people are responding to the messages and the products they're putting out there on the market. Events like we're experiencing at the moment can cause great big behavioural shifts. Sometimes they can be short term, sometimes they can be longer term. But again, social media is a really good example of being able to have these insights and these tangible experience at your fingertips. An example of how I might use this tool, on a normal day, I might search key hashtag terms such as bread, toast, sandwiches, low carb, seeded, but I've recently expanded my search to include hashtag lockdown and hashtag stay safe. It's a great way to see what people are doing, why they're doing it, and how they're using your products and services and your competition and how they might have changed. For example, there has been an influx of people posting on social media about how they are experimenting with making their own sourdough, something which could be quite detrimental to a lot of our products if people realise that actually they're just going to make it at home from now on. The next thing to think about is, when was the last time you stepped into the shoes of your shoppers, customers, or clients? Do this, it's really interesting. Put yourself in their shoes. Take the journey from start to finish. Write down at every stage what it is you see, what it is you touch, what it is you hear, and what it is you smell. I love watching people in the supermarket. I love having a nose in their trolleys, much to my husband's embarrassment. Someone I used to work with had no shame in stopping shoppers and asking why they'd put what they'd put in their trolley. It's also a great opportunity to see how you're positioned on shelf. Can you see the logo? Can you distinguish between the variants that you've got? Do you stand out amongst the competition? Are they obscured by shelving? Does it work? Don't forget to follow the journey right through into post-evaluation, whether it's consumer reviews, again, going back to social media. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these things shortly. Also, don't think that one size fits all. If you operate in multiple markets, you operate internationally, you might need to do this for each of those markets. In August last year, it was identified that UK consumers do significantly more shopping online than the rest of Europe. So this is a really good example of how different shoppers in different markets might experience different things. Following on from the shopper journey, you can then look at shopper data. I work in an industry where I'm extremely lucky that we can buy external shopper data. And this, for a lot of products, highlights the fact that your shopper and your consumer or your customer might be very different people. Do you know each of those people and what they want from your brand and how to speak to each of those people differently? For example, your messaging in store might be very different to the messaging that you put out on social media for your end consumer. It's really key to understanding and building solid campaigns and solid brands. An example for me recently is something that I've identified within bread, and that is that pre-family shoppers tend to buy seeded breads, sourdoughs, specialty breads. But once they have a family and they move into that family life stage, these behaviors and habits change. They start buying more white bread and more wholemeal breads. I wanted to find out a little bit more about this, but with no research, I had to think creatively. I'll talk a little bit more about this shortly. Another place to look are consumer reviews and complaints. 92% of British people do research online before committing to a purchase. This isn't just young people, again, it's older people as well. Reading these reviews and reading the reviews of your competitors leads to some really key insights. You can find out key challenges, barriers to purchase, quality issues, and potentially highlight opportunities for some NPD. When I joined Nicholas and Harris, I spent a lot of time reading reviews on Waitrose and Ocado, and I discovered that the people who were buying one of our brands, Live Life, said that it was the best tasting healthy bread on the market. Wow. They just wished that they could buy it in more places. They wished it had a wider distribution, and they wished that we sold and produced more products like breads, bread rolls and bagels and wraps. Some really key insights there that enabled me to start building our plans for this brand moving forward. I also looked at internal sales data. Think about when your peaks and your troughs are. Are there key times of the day when people are purchasing, when they aren't looking for your brand? What are they buying? Do you have too many products in your range? Are people finding it hard to decide what they want to buy, so therefore they just default to the one that they know? Are there products which were once popular but now have declined? And how are your NPD launches going? Your internal sales data is the thing that you have most immediate access to, and your first port of call before buying any external data. I mentioned earlier that after identifying some key shopper habits, that I wanted to find out a little bit more about why these behaviours were happening. I spoke to a few people about the problem, and I started to build my hypotheses. I then used this to create my own survey using Google Forms. There are lots of other free survey tools out there, whether it's SurveyMonkey or Smart Survey. But I did this, and then I shared it across my own social networks through my own colleagues, friends, family, peers, and I asked everyone that I knew with children to take part. The results were really interesting, and it was clear that just under half of parents were having to sacrifice the bread they like because their children didn't like the taste or the texture. In a category that is declining and has become very commoditized, this has sparked an idea for some really engaging and exciting NPD and a new communications plan, which hopefully you will see over the coming months. And finally, there's Google. Google is always there for you. There are lots of free trend reports that are written annually. There are inside papers and lots of free information. Everyone is taking the opportunity to write about COVID and how it's impacting consumers and businesses. So you really need to look at what is the relevant information, what is fact, and what is fake news. If you do have research budgets and you can do some UNA studies, some usage and attitude studies, focus groups, or accompanied shops, apologies, I've skipped on a slide. My advice is to think about the agency that you are using, think about the methodology they use to really get to know your audience. I worked with an agency a couple of years ago who used a tool very similar to Facebook to really get into and delve into the insights and behaviours of young males between the age of 18 and 30. This tool made this group much more accessible to talk to. I often have found that in focus groups or face-to-face interviews, they aren't as forthcoming as women are, and therefore this tool allowed us to probe a little bit deeper and get them to really show us their behaviours and their insights that allowed us to then create some solid brand plans to target this audience. Consumer insights don't just come from one of these sources, but often a combination of these sources. Sometimes they come together with a clear thread, and sometimes you need to do a little bit more digging. Data insights are great, but there can be too much of a good thing. You need to really make sure that you've answered the question that you set out at the beginning. You need to sort and sift through all the data and information you've pulled together. Pick out any key trends, rank them in order of importance. Get someone else to validate and check them. Use your peers, your network, your colleagues. Make sure that you've answered the question and the hypotheses that you set out at the beginning. You also need to think about what are the things you can change, what are the things you can't change, and realistically, what you shouldn't. Think about that Coca-Cola example that I showed you earlier. Finally, don't stop listening. This is not a one-off exercise. Keep engaging with your audience, build up your own trend reports, identify what are the faddy changes in behaviour versus the long-term shift. Don't become the blockbuster of your industry. So in summary, failing to listen to your audience, consumers, shoppers, customers, users, clients, whatever it is that you want to call them, it could be the one big thing that unpicks all the hard work that you have done to build your brand. Before undertaking any research and getting to know your consumers' behaviours, you need to have an idea of what it is you want to know. You need to have some form of hypotheses. This will enable you to look in the right places and start looking for the right information. You don't need big research budgets. You don't need to use this as a limitation or a constraint. You can use it as an opportunity. There are lots of sources of information available to you. You just need to look for them and build the bigger picture. Like I said, don't go after the big sexy audience because it's more exciting. Sometimes your current consumers are looking for modern contemporary brands as well. And finally, keep listening. Don't forget to reevaluate everything that you've done, everything that you've learned. Situations like what we're going through now are great examples of how things can change quite quickly. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope I've provided you with some ideas into how you can really get under the skin of your consumers and start to build some really strong insights that will take your brands forward.
So Ruth, thank you very much for that. That was brilliant, great content. Really enjoyed that. There's a couple of questions. There's one in the chat room around what percentage of people look at reviews for B2B compared to B2C?
I don't really work in the B2B industry, so I'm not sure on the stats, but I can imagine it's quite high. From my own professional usage, if I'm looking for new agencies or people to work with, I will often look for reviews and recommendations and word of mouth from my peers and colleagues. I think that's really key to when working in B2B is those recommendations. Like I said, I would imagine it would probably be quite high, but I don't know any particular stats.
Yes, so I do have some stats here because it's in my website conversion talk tomorrow. So 92% of us will trust a recommendation from a peer, and 70% of us will trust a recommendation from someone we don't even know. and 61% of customers read online reviews before making a purchase decision. So reviews are really important. Cool, that's good. So I had a question around with blockbusters. I think, as you mentioned, blockbusters didn't really read the trend. It didn't really understand where the tide was going. And you talk a lot about in your talk about having that insight. Are there any other things you do, or you just do you collate all that insight and that helps influence your decisions of how you position that brand?
I look for those insights to inform everything that I do. Now, those insights come from pulling together lots of sources of data, whether that's consumer behavior trends, internal sales data, looking at what products are performing, what are not performing, look at how people are buying your products. So for me, an example, it would be looking at are people buying online versus in store, and then pulling that together with the bigger macro trends to start pulling out these insights. And an insight might be a combination of everything, or it might be based on a macro trend or a behavior change, or it could just be a business performance insight. So I think it's about pulling everything together and finding your key themes and the key trends and using those to base your plans on.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the amount of data you're putting together, and then but that really does influence how you position your brands, doesn't it? And how then you communicate to your target audience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's marrying the two of the data and the more qual information and pulling them together to really form something that's going to resonate with them. Because at the end of the day, it starts with your consumers or your end users, and goes backwards. And if what you're doing isn't resonating, then no matter how you do it and what you do, it's just never going to succeed.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think people forget their customers sometimes when working with their brand and thinking about their communication.
Yeah. And I think that's why I mentioned the shopper journey and getting into the shopper journey bit as well, because I think sometimes you miss some of the bigger picture and you miss some of the little details. So when I worked in food service, it's something that we used to do quite a lot, whereas we had like a form that we used to go out and we used to follow the journey of people in train stations and airports to see what they could smell, touch, hear and feel, and how that all impacted their journey.
Wow, yeah, and I think that those little details are key actually. So even if you're a business to business, we focus on when people come to the office, what that experience is from the moment they open the door to the first person offering them a cup of coffee. So getting those little touches and making sure every customer touch point has been thought of and can be the best possible experience it can be will help with that sales, help with growth. Excellent stuff. And you also mentioned about the older generation. So this question is really a bit more general, I think. The older generation during this pandemic have really had to sort of get on board with the digital movement, digital tools. It's forced people into having to work out not just how they use their iPad to watch stuff, but how they can do video calling, how can they get into WhatsApp groups, Zoom, or online banking. Do you think that this is going to have a lasting effect on how brands communicate, or is it going to create new campaigns where they're targeting an older generation and communicating to that specific age group?
I mean, I don't know whether it will create new campaigns or encourage people to target differently or reposition their brands, but I think the way we need to communicate is going to change dramatically as we see more people consuming online and digital media, whether that's streaming. Even my mother asked me the other day what Netflix was. So as we see older people adopting more technological trends throughout this crisis, we're going to have to adapt how we message to them, whether that's more online advertising, whether it's looking at online shopping. So for Tesco, Sainsbury's, looking at how we communicate on there, the messages we put out, how they find our products, and help them really navigate kind of a whole new world.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. I think a lot of stuff's going to change at the back end of all of this. No one really knows how much, but it will change the world permanently, I think. So and hopefully there will be a lot of good stuff that comes out of it. So just really on the doing the research as well, Global Index was on one of your Google searches. I would recommend everyone having a look at Global Index if you're B2B or B2C.
Yeah.
Either way, there's some great content on there. But I think that's all of the questions, Ruth. So thank you again. Really
no worries.
Going on. Great talk as ever. And thank you everyone who joined us today. So yeah, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.